we have tried to be very clear about the magnitude of the risks here. I think jobs and employment and what we're all going to do with our time really matters. I agree that when we get to very powerful systems, the landscape will change. I think I'm just more optimistic that we are incredibly creative and we find new things to do with better tools, and that will keep happening. My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to be vocal about that. We want to work with the government to prevent that from happening, but we try to be very clear-eyed about what the downside case is and the work that we have to do to mitigate that.
That was OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, whose company created the ChatGPT and image generation tools, testifying on oversight of AI technology at a U.S. Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing along with 2 other artificial intelligence experts. They were questioned about the state of AI development and some of the concerns its usage had, especially regarding the job market and the spread of election disinformation. And this testimony was from a year ago. And today, lawmakers around the world are debating whether they should roll out regulations to address the risks as AI gets integrated into everyday life. My name is Iris Xu. You're listening to The Divide. On July 2nd, Governing.com reported that California lawmakers are considering legislation that would require artificial intelligence companies to test their systems and add safety measures so that they can't be potentially manipulated to wipe out the state's electric grid or help build chemical weapons. As the debate on whether AI should be regulated or not, there's a group of people that's not focusing on racing to the top in AI technology, but trying to bring some equality into the industry and advising governments on regulations.
I'm Gareth. Nice to meet you. I'm the partnerships lead for the Coalition for Digital Prosperity for Asia. Thanks for having me.
The Coalition for Digital Prosperity for Asia is a network that, according to their website, that helps national governments and policymakers grow their digital economies and reap the benefit of digital technologies through good tech policy.
An alliance of digital startups and small and medium businesses that's dedicated to democratizing access to digital technologies.
Democratizing access to digital technologies?
We came about because it was quickly becoming quite clear that there was a need for increased awareness of digital regulations across the region because of how many of them were popping up across the Asia Pacific. So, for example, a Singaporean company, right, doesn't really want to be a Singaporean company for very long. They want to expand to the rest of Southeast Asia and to the rest of the world as quickly as they can. So when these expanding digital businesses head out into other markets, they might encounter different regulatory regimes related to personal data or AI or other things. And so we want to give them a fighting chance to succeed amidst what can be a pretty confusing process when you're trying to enter new markets across the region. In practice, what we really hope to achieve is to provide digital small and medium businesses with the knowledge they need to navigate changing regulations across the region, while also serving as an intermediary between business and government and connecting them so that governments can benefit from the views, the perspectives, and listen to the concerns of the businesses that their policies are most likely to affect.
So what Gareth is doing is helping small and medium-sized enterprises to expand their footprint in other countries in Asia. And that makes me wonder, which country has the most stringent digital regulations?
Across Asia, I suppose, we don't necessarily operate in China, but China does have some very, very unique regulatory approaches, which are quite restrictive in the way that they have constrained, the operations of digital companies. Things like data policy. China is pretty distinctive, I think, in the way that they have sought to do digital regulation in particular. And this has had implications on on their own businesses as well as the operations of businesses in China as well. But it's an approach that is, I'm not going to say unique to them, but it's an approach that I think is quite distinctively Chinese. Basically, I think many other countries across the region are taking slightly different approaches to the issue of technology regulation.
It is not surprising that China has some of the strictest technology regulations in Asia. Google's search engine, which was launched in 1995, is still banned in China today. According to the Brookings Institute, China is the world's second largest digital economy, second only to the United States. Yet it remains largely closed to foreign competition, with restrictions on digital services imports, a heavily restricted and regulated internet that requires data to be localized, and limited access to online information. Outside of China, governments and the tech industries are trying to develop frameworks that can maximize AI benefits to society while mitigating its risks.
In Asia, Singapore, for example, is trying to position itself actually as a leader in certain kinds of technological regulation, right? So in terms of AI regulation, in terms of financial services, fintech regulation, it is trying to position itself at the lead of that. And that means it has to be quite sensitive to what is happening in the rest of the world, because the principle of it is always to kind of like strike a balance between innovation and safety, right? Going to another example, maybe using a framework like the European Union's GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, that was obviously pushed out in the European Union the middle of the last decade, and it's since kind of become the gold standard of data protection regulation, with a lot of countries taking up similar kinds of regulation, tweaking it to a certain extent, and making use of it, like Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore as well. A lot of their data protection regulation is based on principles that are enshrined, or that were originated, or the very least kind of mooted in the GDPR, in the EU GDPR. And then countries will take that and tweak it to their specific purposes.
Companies and regulators are often at odds with each other. For example, as California lawmakers consider AI regulations, some in the industries are pushing back, saying that holding them liable for the downstream uses of the technology they built will stifle innovation and force a multi-billion-dollar industry out of California altogether. And here's Gareth, the mediator between the two.
I mentioned that we have a binary mission. So that's equipping digital companies with knowledge so that they can adapt to different regulations in different markets, and creating dialogue between governments and small businesses so that there's strong lines of connection while governments do move to design digital regulation. So the first part of that, equipping companies with knowledge, we hold regular knowledge sharing sessions with our members on topics like emerging AI laws, and give them access to a regular policy newsletter that informs them about recent developments in digital regulation. We also hold regular meetings with our members to serve as a forum for them to ask any questions and field any questions that they might have through some of our own channels, like Telegram chats and things like that. So to simplify what we do, you might know that a lot of larger companies have whole departments that are dedicated to public policy and government affairs, which smaller companies don't have the budgets for, right? So the DPA, the coalition, functions like a free government affairs department for digital startups. Alongside this, our second function is forging good lines of communication. So we run regular events and take part in government consultations on key topics like AI, data protection, and digital trade. And this gives our members the opportunity to participate in these discussions with government and contribute their perspectives. So at our launch event, actually in Taiwan last November, which we co-organized with Taiwan's own startup stadium, we were honored to be able to welcome representatives from the Ministry of Digital Affairs and the Ministry of Economic Affairs, who were able to attend and hear some of the perspectives of our members, as well as the other Taiwanese digital SMEs that were in attendance.
It is great to hear from Gareth that Taiwan's Ministry of Digital Affairs and the Ministry of Economic Affairs are communicating with Taiwanese and international digital small and medium businesses. But is Taiwan an attractive market for digital investments?
Of course, yeah. I think we launched in Taiwan last year, and we have a few Taiwanese members, including GoGoLook and Kdan Mobile. Taiwan is definitely an area of interest for a number of our members. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the Taiwanese market. The proximity of Taiwan to a lot of high-tech supply chains makes it very, very attractive. So yeah, Taiwan is definitely a market of interest, and it's a market that we are keen to operate more actively in if we can.
So in that regards, how is Taiwan doing in terms of digital regulations?
Yeah, I would say that Taiwan has always had a fairly forward-thinking approach to digital regulation. I mean, I think Taiwan is really one of those case studies of a country where there is an appreciation of the degree to which there's an appreciation of the transformative potential and economic power of technology because of the strength of the semiconductor sector, right? Taiwan has constantly had a pretty good grasp of what kinds of processes to put in place from our experience in the past. I guess the question kind of goes on to what is a good digital policy, right? What makes it? Does it necessarily mean you have to be fully open or fully closed or something like that? And I think it's a hard question to answer that one. But in terms of there being no one-size-fits-all approach that's necessarily the best for every situation, Taiwan I think Taiwan generally is able to tread the line between introducing regulations that make technologies more safe while also ensuring that there remains room for innovation and entrepreneurship.
According to some reports, U.S. regulators are planning to open investigations into big tech companies and their dominance over the AI industry. I asked Gareth whether he thinks this is the right approach. Should countries regulate AI?
Oh, the regulation of AI development is inevitable. There's no way around it. There's no reason that governments shouldn't look to regulate AI in some way. It's too powerful and too impactful to avoid regulation. The really important question is actually how AI development should be regulated. Again, going to what we discussed just now about treading the line on making sure that we're encouraging innovation and safety, right? It's the same thing for AI. We need to make sure that we're making the technology safer for citizens and society while also continuing to give people room to explore new ways to use it within like a framework of rules and regulations. For AI laws, you have two approaches that are currently popping up across the world, right? One is this approach that is favored by the European Union, which tries to regulate AI as a whole. Horizontally is the terminology, across sectors. So the most obvious example of this is the EU's AI Act, which was passed by the European Parliament in March and was formally accepted just this past May. The EU AI Act outlines categories of risk for use cases of AI, specifically for use cases of AI, meaning that restrictions placed on certain applications of AI technology are in place regardless of the sector that they're operating in. So at the very, very top of the system, there's a category, for example, of high-risk AI use cases, which isn't like incredibly well defined, but which is totally prohibited. So this means that there's a degree of uncertainty that creates problems, especially for small companies that are risking a lot on a particular approach to AI. And on the other hand, the other approach that is the one that is adopted currently by the UK and to a certain extent by the US, which tries to rely on existing regulations, sectoral regulators, and a more bespoke vertical approach. So the previous one is a horizontal approach. This is a vertical approach to governing specific applications of AI. So in this model, you have existing laws governing the use of technology and existing agencies that are also overseeing the use of technology or the regulation of a particular sector, right? They will be the first port of call when figuring out how to regulate AI. So you try and fit AI into that framework, meaning that, for example, AI use in the agriculture sector will be left up to agricultural regulators to regulate. So a great example of this is actually in Taiwan. So recently, Taiwan's Financial Supervisory Commission released guidelines for the use of AI by financial institutions that were based on 6 core principles like fairness, accountability, and transparency, as well as 8 supporting policies, right? These guidelines for financial institutions were designed and introduced by the regulator, the FSC, that best understands their business functions as well as their limitations. That's to say, like what can they actually comply with? What are they able to actually do, right? So for the DPA, we tend to view that vertical regulation just makes more sense. It means that regulations can be more targeted, and importantly, they can be tweaked quickly if there are any gaps that are identified, or if there's a subsequent decision reached that the regulation is too restrictive. You can tweak it because it's just a sectoral regulator who has to make a kind of decision about it. Alongside this, there's other nitty-gritty bits and pieces that we think should find their way into emerging AI regulations. So a lot of AI regulations, for example, don't draw a clear distinction between companies that create an AI model and the companies that are deploying or using the AI model, right? So that means you lose a lot of nuance when you're outlining responsibilities, right? It's, if you got car crash, are you going to blame the manufacturer or the operator or, something like that, basically, right?
So regulations aside, Taiwan is home to the world's largest semiconductor manufacturer, TSMC. I want to know, how important is the chip-making industry to the AI development and digital technology?
Chip making is enormously important to AI because AI depends on specialized chips that are designed by companies to be very, very computationally powerful, as well as efficient at running specific calculations that are needed for AI systems. So trying to run some of these AI-related processes on chips that aren't optimized for these purposes can mean that you require a lot more computational power and a lot more time and a lot more energy to run things effectively, to train like a model or something. So as I mentioned previously, the kind of raw, concentrated computational power that modern chip making enables is actually one of the factors that has enabled both traditional and now generative AI to be as effective as it is. So something a lot of people don't realize sometimes is that AI is born and lives in data centers and on the cloud. So scalable computational power resources like the cloud are what has really accelerated the development of new digital technologies, because it gives smaller companies and other organizations like governments the ability to build digitally without having to invest into big supercomputers, which are very, very expensive. So going back to your question, a lot of this data center and cloud compute power is provided by cutting-edge semiconductors that can often only be produced in Taiwan and maybe South Korea, because those are the places where the highest end fabs are located. As concerns about data center energy sustainability are also starting to emerge in places like Singapore and Japan, we're also going to start seeing increasing demand for even more specialized chips that can do AI work more efficiently with lower energy draw. And the same really goes for any new technology. Everything is going to be on data centers, on the cloud, and it's all going to rely on chips, right? So the chip making industry is incredibly vital to digital technology and AI development all across the world, and countries that intend to become players in AI across not just Asia, but the rest of the world are really going to have to pay very close attention to what's happening in Taiwan.
Thank you for listening to The Divide. If you want to know more about Gareth Tan's work, go to digitalprosperity.asia. My name is Iris Shi. This episode of The Divide is produced by Radio Taiwan International.